Well, thank you all so much for being here this morning. My name is Maggie Miller. I'm a cybersecurity reporter for Politico, and I'm very happy to be moderating a session this morning on geopolitics of the internet. How will Trump reframe the new world order? Alongside me today, we have some great panelists. They include Ari Schwartz, the managing director of cybersecurity services at Venable. Then we have Jim Lewis, the Senior Vice President at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Milton Mueller, Professor of Public Policy at Georgia Tech. Thanks for making the trip up here. And Luke Hogg, the Director of Technology at the Foundation for American Innovation. Thanks so much all for being here today. All right, so we're going to kick off the session today with a conversation around everyone's favorite or least favorite app, TikTok. So when President Trump entered office last month, he signed an executive order that delayed TikTok's being banned in the U.S. due to lack of being sold by ByteDance for 75 days. So I'm interested to hear from our panelists your thoughts on what this means in terms of the future of TikTok in the U.S. and also, the operation of Chinese-owned apps in the U.S. As the Trump administration kicks off. And happy to start with you, Luke, since you're right next to me.
Well, I think I have a very strong opinion on TikTok. The first thing that we ever wrote at the Foundation for American Innovation on the issue of TikTok was in 2020. So I've been working on the issue of TikTok in the United States for a long time. And I think, obviously, from the perspective of somebody who has worked and educated to try and promote the ban and has supported the ban, the delay and the what President Trump has done is not ideal. I would have liked to see. I would prefer to not have this delay. However, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think ultimately President Trump is willing. Ultimately, the goal of everybody is we want TikTok to stay in the United States, but we also want it to be secure. And so if the delay is what's necessary in order to actually get a sale and to secure TikTok in that way, then that's what it takes. I mean, obviously the litigation went for so long that I believe by the end of the Supreme Court case, they would have only had something like 10 days in order to sell a multi-billion-dollar platform. So if it takes 75 days and then at the end of that 75 days, it's either sold or it's either sold or banned, then that's the devil's in the details there. I think that's a perfectly fine solution. But I do think it's important to note that, the reason that this sale hasn't gone through, one of the big reasons that that TikTok has fought against this legislation so strongly is, ultimately it's up to the CCP. I mean, if you even go and watch their oral arguments in the Supreme Court, they're very clear that the ultimate reason that they haven't sold yet is because the CCP won't let them and doesn't want them to. And so I think that ultimately at the end of the 75 days, we're going to see a ban.
Milton, do you have any thoughts?
Many thoughts, yes. By the way, is there an echo here? Can you hear me okay? Because I'm really getting an echo over here. Okay, good. So you really have to put this in the broader context. It's not really about TikTok per se. It is about free trade in information technology and whether that free trade also includes China, right? So in effect, the U.S. spent 30 years from the 80s to the present day, or maybe 10 years ago, creating a global regime for free trade in information technology and information services and telecommunications. And suddenly, because of panic about China, we are deciding that any form of interaction with China, any form of digital interaction, any form of communication, any form of information service is a national security threat, right? Now, one of the problems with this whole narrative is that the notion of a threat, there is no threat model behind these threats. It's China, it's dangerous, right? There's no plausible scenario in which you can show me that the possession of TikTok on 1 million American phones is actually something that can threaten the security of the entire United States or our governments. That's just not a plausible case, and we've debunked that repeatedly. And so the bigger problem here is you asked, what are the implications for other apps? The implications are dire. The Supreme Court fortunately said that the sort of covert content manipulation rationale for the ban was off the table because it's a First Amendment violation, right? They can't do that. But they said, oh, the data thing is the real threat. Okay, so again, the court has no real idea how the exchange of data, which is involved in every digital service, every internet service, every internet access provider is exchanging data with other countries around the world, including China. So if data exchanges are per se a national security threat, then every Chinese app, Temu, you name it, it's a national security threat. And I think this is almost a reductio ad absurdum. It's like, it's clearly not true to say that, because I bought a dog hut from Temu and they know something about what I buy, that this is something that threatens the United States of America. I just haven't seen anybody make that case. So we really have to decide whether we want an internet, whether we want an open and free digital ecosystem, or do we want to go back to digital isolationism in which we try to wall off countries, sort of like we used to do in the 60s and 70s when we had national telecom monopolies and we had no trade in broadcasting services.
Ari, Jim?
I mean, I'll just
Ari.
I'll just say very briefly.
Oh, no, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
On this topic, that I think right now, the phone ecosystem that we have is very secure. There's lots of reasons for that, but that is not always going to be the case, right? And the fact, we've even seen in Europe where they've, there's this big push on the opening up the marketplaces, trying to getting competition issues, that we've seen security issues come with the apps that they're allowing in there, et cetera. In ways that Google and Apple cannot be the gatekeepers to protect for security anymore. So I do think that there is kind of the ongoing long-term picture that you have on apps and security of apps that we have to take into account here. And I think that's, I think it's a combination of both the kind of like fear of what can happen down the road, and also like just a general fear of the Chinese infiltrating the marketplaces. Both of those things at the same time.
TikTok has been loads of fun. I'll miss it when it's gone. For example, all those people who switch to what they call it, red note.
Yeah.
They were mistranslating it. It's like a red book, which is a reference to Mao's theme. People didn't even know that. Is kind of pathetic. You then had the CEO of TikTok, at least the American TikTok, saying that they were defending freedom of speech in America. I thought that was hilarious too. A Chinese company headquartered in Beijing is defending freedom of speech. Run that one by me again. So it's been a very silly argument all along, but the key thing to watch is the Chinese Foreign Ministry put out a statement at this point about a month ago where they said, you know what, let the market take its course, let the companies work it out. The Chinese Foreign Ministry does not make statements about like that without sign off from the highest level, right? So what they're signaling is we're open to a deal, we're open to a sale. Will people be able to come up with the money? Will you be able to come up with a governance structure that actually addresses some of the concerns? The way intelligence works now is big data, right? So you hoover up tons of information. Chinese are a little paranoid. They hoover up as much as they can. Whether they can make use of it is another matter, but it's a question of whether you want to accept that risk. So I'm not worried about content. I mean, I watch a lot of TikTok for purely research purposes, and I have never yet felt the desire to burst into the Chinese national anthem after watching it for a few months or so. So forget the content stuff. The data stuff is a concern. There's also a reciprocity issue. TikTok can operate in the US. American companies can't operate in China. right? American social media companies. So we'll see what happens. There's a looming constitutional crisis. I think there's ways to avoid it, right? Because the bill says, you have to get rid of it. And if we don't do that, you'll have a problem. I think there's solutions, though, and there's certainly people queuing up. It's worth a lot of money. And that's been I've talked to a couple of the potential buyers, and they're trying to figure out if it's worth the price. The algorithm isn't a big deal anymore. A long time ago, TikTok's algorithm was special, gave it an advantage. People call it sticky because people watched it more. That, of course, freaked out the other American social media companies who've done their best to copy it. The algorithm is the advantage anymore. It's the user base. It's the customer base. And that's what people want to buy. You'll note that was built into the law, right? So we'll see. I think a deal probably will look like transfer of ownership to some more American flavored board. It's already pretty heavily American. Controls similar to Project Texas. The problem with Project Texas was it was TikTok policing itself. Oddly enough, that didn't strike confidence in a lot of people. So you'll get some blend, but I think a deal, at the end of the 90-day period is probably the best outcome and the most likely outcome as well.
That's interesting. Luke and Jim, you've kind of given your take on how this is all going to end. Milton, Ari, how do you think initially at the end of 75 days, this is going to go for TikTok? Are we going to have TikTok in this country or is it going to disappear?
I think it's going to stay. I think the Trump administration will make some kind of a deal. I do not think there's going to be a sale of the sort contemplated by the bill. It's also possible the bill could be repealed or the president could declare, that it's not an adversary or some sleight of hand like that. I think we have to respond to Jim a bit. This idea that every Chinese company is a state actor, again, that is completely inconsistent with a global free trade regime. If we say, despite any evidence, it's not headquartered in Beijing. TikTok US is headquartered in Singapore, TikTok Global. And ha, ha, ha. But what does that mean exactly? It means that an entrepreneur in China cannot globalize their markets. And everything they do is completely under control of the Chinese state. So isn't that the same thing that the Chinese believe about Google and Meta with equal numbers of justifications? So if we have that attitude, again, we are back to a nationalistic, we are abandoning free trade, and we are not allowing competition in our markets. Who says that competition cannot come from a Chinese company? Didn't we just learn that again with DeepSeek? So I don't see where I think everybody realizes now that the law was a mistake and that it was a panic, and we're going to try to find some way to get out from under it because it's an absurd thing.
Ari or Jim, do you have first?
Go ahead, Ari. No.
He was asked talking to you directly.
Yeah, but they asked you to please. After you, Alphonse.
I'll just say that I think that there will be some solution that will keep TikTok in the United States. I do not know exactly what it will be, but I feel very confident. The president has said that he wants to keep TikTok. I don't think that there's that many people that are out there saying they want TikTok to go away. So they're just concerned about it being in the hands that it's in. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, no, TikTok will still be here. It will be in a different governance structure, right? But that's not an impossible deal. The larger issue is this question of free trade with China, because frankly, the Chinese cheat, right? Just having been following them out do you realize it's been 29 years since the first case I investigated of Chinese espionage? Amazing, right? They continue to cheat. So we're going to have to work out some deal, but TikTok will not be the victim. I wouldn't mind. They've been so annoying. I wouldn't mind if they were the victim, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, sticking with China, given that this is a geopolitical focused panel, really the first company that came up on the radar on Capitol Hill around this issue was Huawei in terms of concerns of U.S. and allied partner use of Chinese made technology. And recently in the NDAA, there was another $3 billion included for the Rip and Replace program to help smaller telecom groups in the U.S. rip out Huawei and other potentially security issues equipment from U.S. telecom networks. So, do you think this is enough to fully move Huawei out of our telecom systems? And what is the threat from Huawei at this point after, 6-7 years of U.S. action against the company? For whoever wants to start.
Well, I'll start. Just finished, but Huawei remains an agent of the Chinese government. The nice thing about signals intelligence is it's passive. You don't know what's happening to you. We have fairly good evidence from a number of other countries, not just us, that Huawei collects information at the behest of the Chinese state. Okay, so what else is new? The dilemma for the U.S. is, despite our valiant efforts over the last 2 administrations, Huawei is now the globally dominant telecom market. And so when you go to large parts of Europe, when you go certainly to Africa, increasingly in South America, so we have a different problem than we had. Huawei has won the battle. What are we going to do about it?
Mm.
Yeah, so I think at a high level, I think we need to be clear that these are real threats. And I think, I respect Milton's perspective here, but the DoD, Congress, multiple administrations have disagreed with him. And I think that's the same on TikTok and the data security issue there. But there's also the issue of Huawei. Multiple administrations have come and said that there are vulnerabilities. We've looked at this. So in terms of, is $3 billion enough to get it out of our networks? I don't know. I would hope so, because we've already spent billions of dollars doing this. But I also think that it's easy to focus in on Huawei and CTE. And it's easy to forget that there's a lot of other hardware manufacturers that we should also be looking at. I mean, TP-Link is one. The routers in our homes, the routers that several government agencies are actually using have been implicated. It was implicated in Salt Typhoon, was implicated in Vulcan Typhoon. I mean, they've been used. Some of these routers have been used to hack the European Parliament and the European Union. And so, while I think the Secure Equipment Act was a great starting place, and it set up a great mechanism for the FCC, the NTIA, and the Executive Office of the President to look at some of these things. I think we need to start looking at the tech stack holistically. Yeah, we should definitely get rid of Huawei and ZTE equipment in our networks. I think we should be working to get them out of networks internationally in the European Union, in South America, and Africa. But we also need to be thinking about the other parts of the tech stack and where some of those vulnerabilities are going to come from.
Milton?
Let me go, since then Milton can respond to the three of us, because I'm in agreement with these two. So, Huawei is an issue. I'd say both that what Jim was saying, that that Huawei does works for the Chinese government, but also it's in the other direction as well. The Chinese government supports Huawei around the world and makes the cost of giving equipment to other countries at a big discount or free in a lot of cases happen, and supports that work. And we have to be aware of that, and we have to have our allies aware of that as well. I think that it's in fact, and I was feeling pretty good yesterday when I read that Secretary Rubio announced that they are releasing $25 million to Costa Rica, which is meant as a cybersecurity protection that comes out of that ransomware attack. But it also is a sign that we're willing to support them and to build their networks back up, and not have Huawei move in there. And I think that's you have to read that as part of the message from that release. And I think that it's a good sign that we're willing to fight internationally, or to continue this fight internationally, even as there's been this pullback internationally because it does directly affect U.S. networks to have international networks. So that's, I think, where I agree with what Jim was saying. That the international does affect us, our own networks inside the U.S., and we have to be aware of that.
Milton, any response?
Yeah, so we're wasting $3 billion for nothing. Nobody has attributed a single hack that has been attributed to the Chinese to the use of Chinese equipment, right? We actually broke in to Huawei's headquarters and spied on their communications for several years. And we didn't find any evidence of any specific attempt to use Huawei as an intelligence tool. This is not to say that it couldn't be used as such, of course, but that's exactly the point. It's sort of like the assumption here is that it's a risk and it's a danger because it's Chinese and for no other reason. And we're pretending like we cannot monitor traffic. We know so little about cybersecurity that we cannot see whether things have been compromised and whether data is being exfiltrated. I teach cybersecurity. I know about malware. I know about plants. And, it's not like you can't find that stuff out. And so if these rural telephone companies that we're going to waste $3 billion telling them to get stuff out, and we're going to deny them the benefits of competition and equipment, which is why the UK stuck with Huawei originally, why hasn't there been any compromise or major problem with these rural telecom networks? Where was the threat? Okay, so again, look at how this is impacting global trade in digital products. He's saying we need to go out and subsidize Costa Rica and God knows how many other countries to buy American equipment. And they're going to, because they're subsidizing with loans Huawei equipment in the developing world, right? So where does this go? Where does this lead us?
Jim, you're making a face. Do you have any thoughts?
No, I just, if you talk to the GCHQ, BND, the Japanese NPA,
Australia,
the ASD, there's a whole range of intelligence agencies that would tell you Huawei poses a threat. So
tells us what?
Huawei is a threat for signals collection. I had fun with Huawei. Huawei used to talk to me, and I kind of miss them. They were a lot of fun. But at one of the meetings, they said, well, why do you keep saying we're involved? Why do you keep saying we have connections to the intelligence community in China? And I said, well, look, your vice chair came out of MSS. It's on your website. And they said, oh, really? A week later, it was off their website. I don't know. Leap to your own conclusion.
So how many American executives of telecom and companies or AI companies have backgrounds in the Air Force or the military?
The Chinese do say that. They say, what are you complaining about? You do it too. It's a fair point. We don't do it.
It's sort of like saying the internet was funded by the Defense Department, right? It's what was it? Putin said it's a CIA project. Is that what you're saying about?
Why don't we move to the next question?
I was going to watch this play out a little longer, but sticking with, thank you, Ari, for bringing up the news about Costa Rica and the funding, which just a plug for Politico, my colleague got the scoop on yesterday. But I want to ask, after a couple weeks of a lot of debate over the pause in foreign aid by the U.S. that has included cyber tech support by the U.S. to countries like Costa Rica, Albania, others, as well as many different programs through USAID. So, of course, we have now the funds restarting to Costa Rica. But, for everyone on the panel, what's the impact of this pause in foreign aid in terms of support to our allies and partners on tech, cyber operations, and how does this potentially open the door for China to, come back in and offer some of their support, some of their products in these nations with the U.S., at least temporarily stepping back for whoever wants to start on that question?
I'll be the provocative one. So I guess the provocative statement is I truly don't understand some of the pearl clutching about USAID and what's going on. I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable for an administration to come in, and USAID has a long history of graft and waste, fraud, and abuse. This used to be a bipartisan issue, and now because President Trump is doing it, it's become a very political thing. I mean, essentially what they're doing is pausing aid so that they could figure out where this $40 billion is going. And we were already seeing a lot of this funding go, start to restart and go out the doors. I'm a very strong proponent of internet freedom programs. We've supported the Open Technology Fund and USAGM. I support a lot of the things that USAID does, but I think we do it as a service to do the pearl clutching and say, oh, this independent agency that doesn't really have very much oversight, that we don't really know what they're doing with all this funding, that this is such a huge problem. So I think the impact on actual, cybersecurity programs and things that we're doing internationally is very minimal because, I mean, it's been 3 weeks. Like if your program in wherever can't operate for 3 weeks without US money, then I think that's a separate problem that we need to be considering.
Thoughts from any other panelists? Jim?
So in speaking to the previous senior officials in the previous administration with a national security or diplomatic portfolio, they agreed with the statement that foreign aid was a tool we used in the Cold War for political purposes. Cold War ended, and so it drifted more towards social objectives, right? Social policy, and that we needed to reorient foreign assistance to be a tool of foreign policy and security policy again. And so that's a process that's underway. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. That, when you find there were a number of unusual things, I'm not sure I would characterize them as graft, but USAID funding Huawei, for example, probably a mistake indirectly through the World Bank. But we have to restore the focus on national security. The way it was in the Cold War, it was created as a Cold War tool. And it's back, sorry, but that's what we're going to need to do.
Well, as I said, I'm very glad that they've reopened the funding for the purposes for cybersecurity purposes, and especially in the case with Costa Rica. I do want to speak up that I'll just say I worked with people from state and USAID that did funding, and I found all of them to be very committed to the mission and wanting to do the right thing, and not. I think that we're seeing them kind of tarred as being, lazy and looking out for graft. Like that's the furthest thing from the truth. They could have been doing other things. It's hard to get those jobs, right? These are people with high degrees that could have been doing a lot of other things, and they went to the USAID because they wanted to help other people. So I think that's important to put in here as well.
And we probably ought to double down on Ari's point, is that these people were really concerned about what their mission was. We need to redefine the mission, but Ari's right.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I wasn't disparaging anybody that works at USAID. I think that they're all good people that are doing good work, but I think it's also the question needs to be asked, like what is the mission now? I think to Jim's point, this is a Cold War. What is the point of doing DEI programs in Sudan? I don't get it.
I agree with that. I don't think you need to fire everybody in the agency to get to that point, though. I think you can have them work with you to figure that out, especially because but from what I've seen, they're all committed to the mission. So why not have them open and help them redefine? The people that know help you redefine the mission.
And just Milton, do you have any thoughts before?
Just that if Trump, and again, I'm not endorsing or criticizing Trump's agenda here. I'm just saying if his agenda is to sort of be America first, pull back from the internationalism of the Biden, or not really the Biden administration, but previous, Democratic administrations. If that's his agenda, then the attack on AID makes sense in this, but it's so small a part of that Cold War agenda, or that carryover Cold War, that you might look at it as them picking on the most vulnerable target and seeing how far they can go. Because I can't think of any other way why Musk would run around saying that it's a criminal organization, right? This is just clearly an exaggeration, and they're picking out a lot of uh, absurd things that are being funded and exaggerating it. So I would look at this as more as a signal of, where we might be going rather than as a thing in itself.
And it's been pointed out to me, at least in the space around technology, countering disinformation, that with the US kind of temporarily stalling aid or in some cases eliminating programs, we are opening the door to countries like China, Russia to move into some of these nations. How, as part of the sort of reconsideration of US foreign aid, can the US ensure that we're not kind of leaving some of these positive relationships on the table for some of our adversaries to potentially take advantage of in the space of cyber tech disinformation? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I agree with what Jim was saying before
Mhm.
about adding on to that's got to be the focus. The first focus has to be national security, and having China be the first focus of that is certainly okay with me. And looking at it from that angle of the threats there, especially with what we've seen with Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and the efforts there. Like, we know that there's a direct threat to our critical infrastructure that comes from being tied into other nations as part of this, right? I mean, and other networks. So and I think we need to. That's a good place to start the conversation.
Both the Russians and the Chinese do have programs and plans for doing the kinds of things that USAI to do. I don't know if you saw, there was a note yesterday, I forgot where it was, but the Russians are unhappy that their plan isn't working. For some reason, people don't seem to desire to join a Russian-led coalition. Don't know why. But the Chinese are a little more effective. They have problems too. The government put satellite televisions in about 2,500 African villages, and that was great. And they offered educational programs, which is a plus. But they also offered entertainment. Apparently, that's where it failed. Is nobody wanted to watch Chinese television. So, but the fact that they haven't figured out how to do it doesn't mean we can take a breather and step on the sideline. We have to compete the way we used to compete, and that's where I think USAID is essential.
Yeah, I think three quick points on this. One, I think if we're talking about cybersecurity, we also need to focus on American cybersecurity, right? Like, this is money that's going to our allies, and that's very important, but we're also not spending enough domestically on securing our critical infrastructure and the like. If we're talking about, the use of sharp power internationally, I think that the Chinese were very successful in leapfrogging legacy technology in the global south, right? Like, the fact that you don't have to, you can just build cell towers instead of having to build a whole, telephone network is crazy. But the United States now has the advantage again with the changes and the advancements in fixed wireless technology and satellite technology, satellite internet. I would be leveraging the American competitiveness in those industries, if we're talking about kind of infrastructure and sharp power. But finally, supporting the work that we're doing in software. We've been a long time supporters of the Open Technology Fund, USAGM. All these programs go back to the Cold War, and I think that they were far more effective. I mean, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, I would argue, were far more effective than direct foreign investment in infrastructure in countries. And I don't know if y'all would agree with that, but there's a lot of things that we can do that don't necessarily involve USAID as an entity.
Look, if you're talking about influence operations, that is to say, sort of global competition in the realm of soft power and ideas, then the most important thing the U.S. has to do is actually stand for the right values, right? If we are actually free and prosperous, people will like that and they will get the message. If we are saying we stand for freedom and we're against authoritarianism, and then we start banning apps and restricting trade, we're undercutting our message, and people know this. I mean, I have African students in my class, and we had the TikTok debate, and they were like, this isn't America. Why are you doing this, right? That is completely clashing with their image. So quite apart from USAID, we have to stand for something consistent that is different from the Chinese Communist Party. We have to stop imitating their policies and their tactics.
So I can't let the panel go by as a cyber reporter without asking at least one cyber question. Ari, you mentioned Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon. For those who aren't familiar, some major Chinese cyber attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure in the past few years. In the case of Salt Typhoon, the infiltration of wide swaths of U.S. telecommunication networks and targeting government officials, including the compromise of President Trump's phone. Now that this has been happening the last few months, the Trump administration is in power now. I mean, it was a pretty personal attack linked to China against the Trump administration officials in power. How do you think the Trump administration may be looking at responding to this? I know we're still in early days, officials still aren't in place, but it is still potentially a very active hack going on and a pretty brazen one in terms of targeting Trump himself pretty personally. So I don't know, Jim, Ari, as sort of more cyber experts on the panel, if you had thoughts on next steps.
Well, I mean, at the end of the Biden administration, they put together this executive order, which was probably the most detailed executive order I've ever seen, that went into addressing both sets of attacks as part of what they were doing. And the Trump administration so far has kept that. I think they probably will rewrite it a bit, but I think parts of it will stay, and they'll probably add their own pieces to it as well. So I think that it's something that is being reviewed right now. There is a kind of a framework out there. This has been like a bipartisan issue to ensure that we continue to protect our critical infrastructure. I think it will continue to be that way, and that's a good signal if we're taking pieces of this executive order and making it Trump's own executive order, but really moving forward some of the ideas and then coming up with new ones on top of it.
So there's a domestic aspect to cybersecurity, and the executive order laid out it was detailed because it was a sort of follow on to the first executive order, and hopefully parts of it will stick. That was the theory. Why are we putting out an executive order so late? Because it's just things that anyone would do, no matter what party they're from. The other side of cybersecurity is the international side, and on that one, our last serious talks with the Chinese on cybersecurity were in 2015. And so the Chinese are not interested in renewing discussion with us on this. And they've pretty much said that it's interesting. Thanks. We'll get back to you. As long as China is unwilling to make concessions on reducing their level of very aggressive espionage, you're going to continue to have cybersecurity problems. You can't have a giant country do that. Now, to be fair, the Chinese say, well, what are you blaming us for? You do that too. To me, as an ex-negotiator, that sounds like a space for a deal. You think we're doing it. We know you're doing it. Is there some middle ground? But right now, they're not willing to talk. And that will be one of the challenges for the Trump administration is getting the Chinese. Behind all this, what are the Chinese actually looking at? They're looking at what they assume is their eventual coronation as the leading nation of the world. They think they're on track to do that. They're also looking near term at the effect on trade. And so there is possibly with TikTok or with cybersecurity, some trade deal that could include aspects of that. But right now, we're not talking things are bad. It's not going to get better.
Before I move on, do either of you have any?
Yeah, I think the good thing about the Salt Typhoon incident is that clearly it was a cybersecurity vulnerability that had very little to do with the nationality of the equipment providers. They exploited American providers, they exploited various kinds of equipment, and they exploited our own built-in vulnerability through Kalia, right? Which is something we should be emphasizing here. So cybersecurity is what it's about. It's not as much about geopolitical competition as you might think. It's like states are going to do intelligence. We are doing it to them. They're doing it to us. It's never going to stop. The question is, can we protect our infrastructure by adopting sound cybersecurity practices and implementing them and catching and detecting the intruders? That's what it's going to be all about.
And that leads to the dread R word, which is you have to regulate. One of the companies that was a victim in Salt Typhoon used as a default password 1111. Damn, that fooled them, our Chinese. No, of course it didn't. So how do you? It will be a challenge. It was a challenge for every administration since the internet has been done. But how do you regulate cybersecurity to require companies to behave? Ari, I don't know if you heard.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back, like we had black energy 12 years ago, right? It's a constant effort here where we know that our adversaries are seeding the battlefield and putting malware into our critical infrastructure, and we're constantly trying to pull it out and make sure that we're being protected. I think we have raised over the years, I mean, through the efforts that we have raised the protections on a wide range of critical infrastructure. I mean, a few years ago, healthcare was really not protected at all. It's gotten much better than it was. Still has a long way to go. The energy sector, when black energy happened, had very few protections. Has pretty well protected. Has raised its game. Still has a ways to go. So we continue to get better and better. The adversaries only have to be right once, right, to get in. So and they get better too. So this is not like most other threats to critical infrastructure where you can solve it and then the problem goes away. Where it's going to be going on, as Milton was saying, going to be going on forever in terms of getting better and better, and the protections have to continue to get better as well. So we're going to have to keep investing in it. I think it is an area where we have to work together to make that happen. And to date, that's happened. I feel confident that the people that I'm hearing are going into that Trump administration to do this are good people that have experience in this space and would be ready for it, to work with them. So, yeah.
Well, I think I might be cursed by some sort of tech conference issue if I don't bring up artificial intelligence at some point. As we speak, well, they're probably asleep by now, but at least earlier today, the AI Action Summit was taking place in France. And last week, the Trump administration asked for comment on creating an AI action plan as part of, setting out the administration's agenda on putting, safeguards around the use of AI. So where do you think the Trump administration is going on this, and how is it likely to butt heads with the approach being looked at over in Brussels and other EU capitals?
Well, I think the first place is that we should look is Vice President Vance gave a speech in Paris today at the AI summit. If you haven't watched it, if you want to know what the Trump administration is going to do on AI, just don't take it from me. Just go watch that speech. He lays out a pretty strong case for American competitiveness and geopolitical in the midst of geopolitical competition on this. And so I think the AI EOs have already been repealed. They're working on it. I think this is one of the, it's really important that we get the right people in place quickly. This is an important issue, and we can't afford to wait a long time in order to get the people in the White House to start working on some of this. I think in terms of concrete changes, right, there's going to be a lot less focus on security. There's going to be a lot less focus on bias in the kind of in the broad sense of those terms. Obviously, in red states across the country, we're looking at legislation that is focused on civil rights violations. So I think that'll be a part of it, but it will be narrowly tailored. And then finally, I have to give a shameless plug because our team just put out a paper on the issues of intellectual property and copyright and the importance of maintaining access to data, maintaining access to the open web for people building AI systems in terms of international competitiveness. And so that's, in terms of what Trump's going to do, just go watch the speech. Don't listen to me.
I'd like to say that to frame AI as a geopolitical issue, I'm going to talk more about, again, international trade in AI capabilities. So we should not do anything like this Josh Hawley bill that's come up. It's sort of the Decoupling America from Chinese AI Act, in which he's trying to regulate all forms of knowledge and production in order to somehow magically segregate the United States from China. It's, again, just going to be a replay of the TikTok issue in a certain sense. But I think there's something fundamentally misguided about the way we're talking about AI governance. And that is, we're talking about regulating the technology. So I heard somebody say, I think it was Marsha Blackburn, is like, oh, I don't want somebody using AI to do cybersecurity problems, right? And it's like, I'm sorry, everybody who can sit down at a computer and program it is going to come up with cybersecurity vulnerabilities and exploit them if they can get away with it, right? So it's nothing to do with, you cannot somehow magically regulate the technology so that no one can ever use it to do something bad. That just isn't how it works. If you're worried about discriminatory applications, then we have laws against discrimination. So it doesn't matter if you're discriminating in your hiring, whether it's an AI application or whether it's some racist dude sitting at a table, it's illegal, right? And the same with the cybersecurity implications of AI. It's like you have to look at what a specific application does and then decide whether it is against the law or there should be a law that makes it illegal. So the problem with the European approach, which is going to be very costly to them, is that they are trying to regulate in advance. They're trying to license, in effect, AI according to risk determinations, which are unknown. We do not know. We do not have actuarial data about the risks. There are thousands of machine learning applications that are out there or are going to be out there. We have no idea how risky they are until they're used. So I think we have to promote American leadership in this by having a kind of very free and open trade in computing, which is what it is. It's not AI, it's computing or distributed computing. And that will be something where competition will benefit everybody.
This is a red letter moment because Milton and I actually agree on something.
I'll say that I think that in this kind of security versus AI discussion, sometimes we miss the point that security companies have been using AI forever, right? So since the beginning of the security companies, right, they've been using in order to try and figure out the next threats, et cetera. So I think that security companies, AI getting better is good for security. And I want to state that plainly before I say the other piece of it, which kind of aligns with some of the things that we're saying, is that we will regret the day where we said security wasn't important for how AI will function going forward very quickly. So I think that we have to keep vigilant on the side of looking at security flaws in AI code and in AI products, et cetera. But on the other side, as I was saying, I think we don't want to slow down innovation because it helps us with security as much as it's going to hurt us. So
this is a geopolitics session, and one way to think about it is there's three power centers. There's the U.S., there's China, and the European Union. And the actions of these three will shape the internet moving forward. We've sort of touched on some of them, but for the European Union, the thing that concerns me is there's really good data that their regulatory approach has stifled innovation. And when I started working with Europeans in the 1990s, they had tech companies that were equivalent to American tech companies, and their regulations killed them. They complain they don't have any tech giants. That's because they killed them, right? And so for us, the U.S., a strategic problem is how do we help the Europeans revive their economy that has to be digital, right? They're starting to get it. And so I keep referring to the Draghi report, and that's a good test. If you meet a person from Brussels, ask them, have you read the Draghi report? And the answer is too often no. So the issue for us is not regulate or not regulate AI. It's how do we use it in a way that increases security and wealth. And I think that the regulatory approach taken in many places, and that was the earlier panel, doesn't contribute to those goals.
Yeah. Well, since the previous panel went over a little bit of time, this one is going to go about 10 minutes longer. And we have a couple minutes left before I'll release you all to lunch. Does anyone have any questions for the panelists on any topics we've discussed or?
My name is Tom Bowman, and I'm from the Center for Democracy and Technology. One recent event that I've been following very closely and concerned about is the Washington Post publication of the UK issuing the technical capability notice against Apple, which effectively would require Apple to maintain backdoor access for an encrypted data. And in particular, the way that Americans' data might be caught up in that if Apple is actively required to enable backdoor access. This is an area where I think the U.S. should affirmatively take a stance and set a norm that says that we are going to promote security by promoting encrypted services. I'm curious to hear whether the panelists agree with that and whether there are other discrete policy areas where the Trump administration should take affirmative actions to start setting further norms in the geopolitical arena.
Affirmative action, that sounds kind of DEI. I don't know about the Trump administration, but no, totally with you on that. We should totally put our foot down to the British and say that's not happening, because it is an American company. And this is one of the dilemmas of internet governance, is that the globalization created by the internet means that, as we learned with GDPR, if you can force everybody to conform to your rules, then it has global effect. And we cannot have that. Apple is global in scope, and if they build a back door, it's going to affect all of us.
Yes, I totally agree. If they build a backdoor for the UK, then they can build a backdoor for China, right? And that gets to a lot of the things we've been talking about earlier in this panel. So,
assuming they already haven't. And so, there's not a black or white answer here, right? And security agencies hate end-to-end encryption. I get it. On the other hand, it's been downloaded billions of times, too late. So my advice is, think of ways there are technical means to circumvent this without having to get the company to cooperate. And that's probably what you're going to have to resort to.
I'm just going to push back a little bit and say that I think it's moving a little bit so that it's not so much security companies, it's only law enforcement at this point that hates it. I feel like security agencies generally, if you look at the advice from security agencies at this point, it promotes end-to-end encryption.
No, I don't think of security companies as
security agencies. I'm saying
security agencies.
Even the NSA, if you look at some of the things the NSA has said recently, if you look at what CISA has said, they support end-to-end encryption.
You need a technical solution that will give you access to information in a crisis, and people who found it might be less comfortable with what the UK is doing with Apple.
Yeah, and I'll be real quick that, I obviously support end-to-end encryption. I'm not familiar with this specific act, so I can't speak to that specifically. But I also think that we need to be careful about where we're getting our information. Apple regularly makes statements about security and privacy that are proven not true when we're talking about the DMA and the DSA. When Apple says that it's impossible to do something or it's going to prove something, just check who's actually saying that. And again, I don't know about the specifics about this particular thing. I totally believe you. But when specific companies are making claims and maliciously complying with regulations in Europe, I don't know. I just call BS sometimes.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, right here.
Yeah, the title of the panel was Geopolitics. So let me ask whether the United Nations and the ITU, are they actually a threat for government control, especially when they meet later this year, or are they just a paper tiger?
Paper tiger. You probably know my answer to that. I think the ITU is a multilateral treaty organization. It has no real points of leverage over the internet governance infrastructure, such as the address registries, the DNS route, or the standards making process, unless we give it to them. And we're not going to, the United States is not going to give it to them. That's actually a wonderful point of bipartisan consensus. That
It's not ours to give it, you are.
Right, right.
Well, we'll think of it as the ITU is sort of a standard setting body, and so their role in security is limited. The UN has both a standard setting role or a norm setting role, and also some larger political role. And I was surprised that we got through the panel without saying the words cybercrime convention. And we don't have to talk about it. I'm sure everyone's divided, but the rest of the world has moved in a certain direction. How useful it is to have the UN. I used to work there. It's got limited utility, but it's a tool that we could use to help move things in our direction. And if we don't, the other guys will.
I would just say, I think we're minimizing the impact of the ITU. Spectrum is a really big issue, and spectrum harmonization is really important if we're talking about geopolitics, whether that's for the DoD or for a private use. I think the UN is totally a paper tiger. I mean, this is why the UN ambassador is always like a laurel that's given to some big political donor. Like, I just don't care what happens in New York.
The problem is that's true in the short term. It's not true in the long term. And so we've made this mistake before. We're not going to vote for the law of the sea, right? And so that will teach them. And eventually the rest of the world wires around the United States. But yeah, short-term paper tiger, long-term political effect.
And I had hoped to ask about the cybercrime convention, but we ran out of time. So thank you for that. Well, I think that we're at about time. I want to thank the panelists for being here today, and enjoy your lunch.
You never know.